The national and worldwide tsunami of sexual assault and sexual harassment claims have taken down some of the most powerful, but they've also given voice to the voiceless. So WisconsinEye wondered, what's been the impact on two of our local campuses? So I want to thank Lauren Hasselbacher, Title IX Coordinator for UW-Madison. Geraldo VilaCruz is Dean of Students and Title IX Coordinator for Madison College for joining us. I've asked my fellow producer, Rachel Sanders, to join us. So Rachel, why don't you ask the first question?
Yes, so how has the Me Too movement impacted your campuses and your policies around sexual misconduct?
So at UW-Madison, we coincidentally were reviewing our sexual harassment and sexual violence policies this academic year. So over the fall, coincidentally, we were bringing that policy to our governance groups, getting review, and it was actually just posted this January. So it was kind of a perfect time to be messaging that to campus, to be talking about the fact that we're taking this seriously, that there's reporting options, there's confidential resources, and that just kind of happened to coincide with the more national conversation happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, similarly, we're actually going through an audit right now related to our policies and procedures related to sexual misconduct, and so that is something that we're exploring. In terms of the impact to the college, I think over the last year and a half, we've had an increase of reporting from students and faculty and staff, and again, that falls more around harassment, sexual harassment versus sexual assault or sexual violence. But we've also received, increases in those areas as well. So I do think the fact that the society and social media is really bringing this to the forefront is bringing it to the conscious of our college community, and people are wanting to know more about what is out there. How do I support a friend or a family member who may be attending the college?
Well, thanks, Geraldo, because my question was, do you really, as professionals in this field, do you welcome this spate, this tsunami, as I said, of national attention?
Yeah, I mean, we knew it was happening, right? We know from our surveys, we know from, confidential question and answers that we know sexual assault's happening on campus. We know sexual harassment is happening on campus. So the idea that ideally this national conversation is increasing reporting numbers, I think is definitely a benefit to our campus, because ideally then we're going to be able to actually respond to what's happening, get victims, complainants the resources that they need, but also hold people who have found to commit this type of misconduct responsible on campus. So I don't think there's any assumptions that there's been an uptick in actual misconduct. It's just that we're hearing more about it.
Geraldo, you welcome this national
Yeah, I mean, again,
debate?
as Dean of Students at Madison College, we're responsible for creating an environment that's conducive for learning, that's safe, secure, and that people can learn and they can work in the environment. And I think any type of initiative and or social, cultural phenomenon that's going to help our populations want to become more aware and be able to voice those concerns is really welcomed at the college, because we can't take an action if we don't know something's going on. And even with that, there's still hesitation to talk about what's happening in somebody's life as it affects their role as a student at our college. So anything that can increase somebody's comfort level to say, you know what, I can have a conversation, it will be okay, and I won't have to worry about what a lot of individuals worry about, is that's retaliation of some form or fashion. So I do think it's an important thing. I think, as my colleague has shared, the incidence is the same, it's just the reporting that's increasing. As a commuter college, we don't have residential environment, housing, so from our standpoint, we might see something slightly different, but we do receive reports and referrals for incidents that have happened outside of the college environment that have impacted the college environment. So, but it is a different type of set of incidents that we might receive versus UW.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Lauren, could you speak on the kind of the demographic profiles of students? UW-Madison seems to have more younger students who are transitioning from high school, and then we'll start with that, and then to Geraldo.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a pretty traditional state school in that regard in terms of, the demographics of our undergraduate students, but it is always changing. We have a pretty high number of international students as well, and so I think that's a particular area where we can always be improving our communications, making sure that they fully understand the resources and what's available to them. So that might be a coordination with my office along with International Student Services, partnering with different places on campus to make sure these different pockets of students and demographics are getting the resources that they need. And I think where we're seeing some increased attention is actually with our graduate and professional students. We had a 2015 survey on campus where we learned that a lot of our female graduate students were experiencing sexual harassment on campus. And I think that's where we're seeing an increased number of reports. And that's just a completely different analysis and kind of game plan in handling those types of allegations and those situations than a sexual assault allegation from an undergraduate student. There's just very different factors at play there.
And a follow-up to that, do you have any more recent data than the 2015 about female graduates reporting sexual misconduct?
We don't have any more recent campus-wide information like that. Our campus is going to undergo the same survey next spring, so we'll be able to compare the data, and 4 years will have passed since the last time we did that same survey.
Okay. And Geraldo, can you speak to the demographic profiles of students on your campus, since they're tend to be older?
Like a lot of community colleges, technical college systems, we tend to be a place where diverse, underrepresented populations come first, right? So we have our social economic status of our students. They vary from students that are higher level income to students who are low income, and so we do have a diversity of our student population, ethnicity, race. We tend to have a good representation to our district in terms of students that engage us and pursue their education through Madison College. Our average age varies from year to year, but when we look at as a whole, it's around 29 to 30-year-old is our average. But as you move into the different times of the day, that's when you'll see a change in the demographic of the student as we move more into the evening night classes. So it's a very diverse population. We have one of the biggest veteran student populations on campus in the Wisconsin school systems. And so that's one of the benefits of being a community college is we do get that diversity, and it's important for us to really look at how we can work across diverse backgrounds.
And who are you finding certain students reporting sexual misconduct more than others? More women than men?
Yeah, we tend to receive more referrals from females than males. And I think that's pretty traditional when you think about reporting. Age, I'd have to look at the data to really tell you about if there's any differences in age groups. One of the challenges I see happening with some of the referrals we're getting is that there's a lot of lack of awareness in terms of what students are doing, and they're just not aware of the way that they communicate, the way they interact, and part of whether they meet the definition of what we define as sexual misconduct, there's opportunities, and so we are seeing some of that. With some of our younger students who just don't, who haven't had that exposure, and then they're in a college environment, and then they start saying or doing, and then it leads to, which is beneficial, people standing up and saying that's not okay.
Have you changed your protocols in terms of making students aware, hey, that's not okay? Or have you changed the process by which you receive complaints and investigate complaints as a result of the recent spate of international publicity?
In regards to student complaints, I would say UW had a pretty specific kind of course of action in place, and a lot of that is actually required by the Wisconsin State Code that's put in place by the Board of Regents. So in terms of the practical process in which we investigate a claim, that's pretty laid out for us. I would say we can always learn feedback from students about how to communicate those processes, and we're always hearing this communication wasn't particularly clear, or this page of your website doesn't really make sense to me, and I don't know what happens in the next stage of the process. So I think we can always be improving our communications to students and messaging and making clear that they understand that there's a reporting option, that they know, what that looks like if they choose to go through that process, what the potential consequences of that are. I always want students to kind of know what they're getting into before they enter that process, because I don't want them to feel off guard. I don't want them to feel like they got themselves into something they weren't prepared for. We also do have an option to kind of have more of a informal alternative resolution with the student. That probably isn't going to be appropriate for a sexual assault allegation, but it might be appropriate for a situation, right? Maybe some inappropriate comments were made, maybe somebody's feeling uncomfortable with some interactions that happened in class, and really the first step that needs to happen is that the person needs to be talked to about their conduct. They need to be made clear about what is a policy violation and what isn't, and ideally we can address the conduct in that way for particular situations.
Geraldo, have your protocols changed in terms of making students aware?
I think our protocols have remained the same, although with the new changes from the Department of Education and OCR around rescinding some of our past practices through the Obama and in terms of some of the Dear Colleague letters. We are, as part of our impact team, we are looking at, is there any adjustments we need to make to meet some of those changes, and they did add a few more changes that we have to pay more attention to and exploring. But in terms of their protocols, we're really our biggest concern is making sure we're educating our community on what to do when something happens, and I think that's something we can do better at, and to be able to help people understand how, when something's happening, what's the first step, and how do they understand their role as a responsible employee. And one of the challenges we have is staff want to help students, but there's also this, at times individuals may feel like they have to hold the confidence of the student, but there's a difficulty when there's only certain individuals within the college environment that have that ability to have privilege around confidential matters. And so how do we help educate our staff and our college employees around when somebody's approaching you, what are you saying or doing, so you provide the opportunity of choice for that individual when they're coming forward. Because again, our approach, I think, with the movement that we're seeing, is really making sure we're more trauma informed when we're responding, from intaking the information to going through our informal or formal investigations and outcomes.
Quick follow-up, Rachel, if you're okay
Yeah.
with it. If I enroll in the UW-Madison or in Madison College, am I going to get an hour of training on this subject? Am I going to get 90 minutes? Am I going to get, how long?
So when freshmen and transfer students start at UW-Madison, they are first required to do an online training. So we created there's a new training this year after getting feedback from our old program. And that's about an hour long. And all students are required to do that, or they won't be able to register for their following spring semester courses.
I see.
We also have a second in-person stage of the training, and that can be met by taking one of, I think, 4 different kinds of workshops. So those range to being conversations about healthy relationships, about consent, about bystander intervention, but they do have that kind of second in-person stage that is also required of them.
Same question, Geraldo?
Yeah, with our any new student that does go through an online training program that we have, and it's based out of University of Montana. I had a program called PETSA, and we were able to bootstrap and use that. At this point in time, that's the training students have to go through. We are looking at bolstering up our training, our focus, because we do know there's gaps that we want to address. One of the things that we're focusing on now is how do we address the interpersonal violence, more fully, because our training does focus more on sexual violence versus looking at interpersonal violence and just general standard sexual harassment, whether it's, retaliation or hostile environment. Because as I said earlier, those are the ones that we tend to get more of, and we want to really help educate people on how they can address those at the lowest level possible and as appropriate when it needs to happen at a more formal level.
And I was a student at Madison College, and I think a couple years ago, there was a campus-wide notification that there was an assault in one of the parking lots. If I was, as a female student having night classes, what would, and I was feeling vulnerable, what would be the process for me to address that and maybe seek help in feeling less vulnerable?
Well, again, I think it's about creating proactive interventions and supports so people do feel more comfortable. So, I know our public safety office is available. 24/7, and so for evening classes, they're available to help escort students from campus to their cars and things such as that. One of the things we've done climate surveys similarly, and we have to do one in the next year as well. But that's a good question that we ask of how can we help increase one's safety? Because we have regional campuses that aren't in Madison, they're in Fort Jackson, Reedsburg, Portage, and Watertown, and how we address safety issues there is different than how we address it here, and we rely on local PD to assist us. But that's one of those things. What are some precautions we can put into place? And so public safety is always receives referrals on how we can improve safety, and that would be one area. We always welcome, in my office, having conversations and receiving communications. We have a concerns complaint process for students that they can file. That's not related to sexual harassment. It's just you have a concern or a complaint, just in general, could be related to an instructional situation, can be related to an experience you had in the parking lot, or whatever that is. And that's one way that we go through a process where we gather the information and we reach out to the individuals to better understand what the issue is and how we can address it and support it.
So when a sexual assault victim comes forth and says, this happened, don't make me confront my accuser, how do you answer?
Our process would never require somebody, for example, to be in the same room as the person that they're alleging committed a sexual assault. What happens is that they'll do an interview with an investigator, which would likely be me, where they tell me all of the information that they need to tell me that's relevant. So that includes, other witnesses that might be there. Oftentimes there's written communications through text messages, emails, things like that. Anything that might be relevant to the underlying allegations. And then the respondent or the person accused has the opportunity to do the same. But that's also in a conversation with me, not with the complainant necessarily involved in any way. The only part of our process where that would even be an option would be further along at a hearing panel stage, but the complainant always has the option to either not appear at that hearing panel or appear via Skype or over the phone, or however they choose to participate. And we would make sure that they didn't need to be in that same room as the accused.
Same process for Madison College?
Well, we don't use a hearing process. We use an investigative model. So what will happen is if we received a complaint related to sexual misconduct, we would assess it, determine if we would do a little P investigation or a full investigation. If it's determined that we're going to need to do a full investigation, we give notice to both parties that were identified, and then we let them know who the investigator is. We have a set of internal investigators, and so the way that we work in our area, so if it's a faculty, if there's a faculty or a staff member involved, I coordinate with my Title IX coordinator from HR, so we have two coordinators. My responsibility is over student and guest, and my colleagues' responsibilities over employees and third-party contractors. So what ends up happening is that when we receive a referral, we have a compliance team. So my VP and the HR VP meet with myself and the other coordinator, and we review the case and say, what do we want? What do we need to do? And then we make those determinations from there, and then we do the investigation. At no time, are both parties in the room together or talking to each other. We usually do no contact directives for both individuals, just so that they know that they're going to have a place, and what's the situations. Depending on the situations, we might talk about proactive measures that we can take while we're going through an investigation. And we have to be very conscious of how we do that, and make sure that there's equity in that as well. And then once we complete our investigation, then the investigators forward the report to the compliance team. We make determination, we make the decision, and then we send out the notification of the outcome of that investigation to both parties. So they both get it at the same time, and they both get the same information.
Mm-hmm. And we'll start with you, Lauren. What's the hardest part of your job fighting these cases?
You must hear some stories that break your heart.
Yeah, I was going to say there's kind of the practical day-to-day and just the process of working at a university and having a lot of different people involved in the response. I mean, we have a equally truncated process, but yeah, I think you do this work and you hear some really difficult stories, and people are put in really difficult positions, even as they try to kind of negotiate this investigation process. So that can always be difficult, obviously. But I think we all do this work because we care about it, and we want the institution to be a good and safe place for our students, and to provide everybody a fair opportunity throughout that process as well. So I don't think you could do the job if you didn't care about it. So I, for the most part, do enjoy it.
Roll the toughest part?
Well, I mean, it's not an easy job, right? I mean, you're dealing with very, difficult situations with lots of emotions, with whatever party's involved, and our main goal is that we have to make sure we're responding effectively, efficiently, and impartially. And when you're dealing with this type of topic, there are some feelings of bias that you have to respond to. And when we, for example, something could be, offensive but not objectively offensive, right? But the college community wants us to take a severe action when we have to really look at, is it meeting the definition? One of the challenges we struggle with, or I struggle with, is really helping to define what is free speech, what is, academic freedom, and how do we help understand that people have rights, even though we may not like what's being said if it falls within line of what they're able to do for free speech. It's difficult, right? I had a situation where a student didn't like a shirt somebody was wearing because it made a derogatory statement, a negative statement related to a female part of the body, but it was about a hamburger that a place that the name of the pub was referenced in a way that somebody can make an allusion to. I'm not going to explain it because I don't want to provide any advertisement to the pub.
Right.
But it's a real place. They sell the real burger, and the student had the right to wear that on campus. I mean, that's a little thing, but those are the things where people are affected, especially if you're in a non-traditional environment where you're maybe one or two females and there's 10 individuals, right? Could raise some concerns. So I think it's being able to help educate people and be able to help people understand when we do something, this is how we do it, and helping people believe and have trust in the process. And I think that's one of those things that we work with every day. Is it's about the integrity of our process, making sure all individuals, the parties, people connected to the parties, really understand that we're following the process, and we really try to follow that to best of our ability with the various reports that we receive.
With the spate of international and national news stories and PR, you must have a whole different estimate of this, the answer to this question. What % of victims do you think do not report? And are more reporting now? You just said your numbers are up, but what % of victims don't raise their hand or fill out the form? Estimates?
Oh, boy.
Lauren?
I mean, it's hard for me to give it. I mean, I think there's a large number of individuals that don't report for lots of protective classes reasons.
Most incidents go unreported, do you think?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, based on national statistics, they're saying 1 in 4, 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted on college campuses, and reporting numbers don't come anywhere near reflecting that number. So, yeah, we know most are going unreported.
Mm-hmm.
But more are now being reported in light of this spate of
All I can say
publicity.
is, yeah, if we look at our reporting from the last few years, it's higher. It's like 2-3 times higher than what it was in previous years. So it's hard to associate because of this is happening. Mm-hmm. All I can say is that our numbers have increased in terms of referrals over the last few years compared to, as we go back and look up to 2007, how many we're getting compared to where we're at today. But I do think that it's happening more than what we say, and I think that's one of the challenges is being able to figure out how we can increase, having individuals share it. I mean, another thing that doesn't get talked a lot about, but we know that sexual assault happens with, whether you're female or male, and I think we need to pay attention to that. But I also want to underscore that, most victims are female, and I think it's important to think about what drives that, and for me it goes back to the socialization of men, and how is that being addressed, and how can we address, and focus on that, even when we talk about gun violence and active shooter, which is another area that I'm intensely look at all the time. What's driving the people that are taking these acts? It's not equal, right? It's not female male. There's something about socialization that's happening, and how men are being raised in this environment. And I think really looking at those cultural underpinnings are important, and how can you do that effectively, right? Is one of the challenges that we have.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, and Geraldo, if you want to expand a little more, could we have you both define the terms of sexual harassment versus sexual assaults, misconduct? Is there an umbrella word? Let's define the terms.
Well, I think we try to stay away from the definition of sexual violence, and we try to, we use sexual misconduct because I see that as an umbrella term, and then underneath that you have, like sexual harassment is a form of sexual discrimination, and so you have like 3 different areas of sexual harassment, whether it's tit for tat, right? If I do this and you'll do that, and there's a power imbalance that relates to that, and that affects the person's work or classroom environment. And there's just retaliation harassment, which is another one, where I accuse somebody of sexual assault, and then they retaliate against me, and then there's just hostile environment, and what is involved with that. But there's tons of different, we have stalking, we have definition of what that is, non-consensual contact or non-consensual contact intercourse, interpersonal violence, domestic violence. Those all fall under, from our perspective, the term of sexual misconduct. So sexual exploitation is another, there's lots of different sub-definitions that, we could go into detail with. So.
Yeah, I would say when I'm, speaking generally or doing trainings on campus, I'm usually probably using those umbrella terms of sexual violence or sexual misconduct. But then all of those terms listed have specific definitions within our campus policies. So as a UW system school, all of our definitions are linked again to the state statute, criminal statutes actually. So when we're doing an analysis of whether somebody's actually violated the policy, that's the language that we're using. But right, when we're talking more in the world of violence prevention and just general training and awareness, we're not using those, particularly technical definitions the way we have to in an investigation.
We live in a town with a reputation for binge drinking. That must get in the way of investigating some of these issues. How do you get past how much did he have to drink, how much did she have to drink? Please, Lauren, and then Geraldo.
Yeah, I would say alcohol is involved in the majority of the investigations involving undergraduates, either by the complainant or the respondent. So I think oftentimes the focus is on the intoxication level of the complainant, because that does come into place when we're analyzing whether or not that person was able to give consent. But we do know it also plays a role in the fact that that's when people are perpetrating as well, is when they're intoxicated. And that's not to be any sort of excuse or defense to that conduct, but we just know it plays a role when we're talking again about bystander intervention, violence prevention, that type of thing. So, Madison also has efforts to, training, education efforts to combat that environment to some extent, but it is definitely linked on our campus for sure.
Any PS on that, Geraldo?
Again, I think it's focused on the reporting individual and how it affects their incapacity, if they're incapacitated or not. Is what's one of the things that we look at. But it's not something that's used as a mitigating factor for the respondent. I mean, they're responsible for their actions, no matter what their level of intoxication is.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're out of time. Well, thank you. Are we making progress here in light of the tsunami of national?
Yeah, I think the trends, the social trends help impact the need for us to move forward, right? I mean, we do things because of the fact that there's things we have to, there's things we just need to do because it makes sense and it's right to do. And it's always helpful when you have that pressure to help you to look at how can you improve your systems and your processes, and in the end it's about creating a safe environment. That's what we're shooting for.
progress, Lauren?
Yeah, I think so. And it's difficult to show what we can do about actually preventing the misconduct. That's one question, but I think the area where we know is improving, and I think we can feel confident is improving, is the awareness of the issue, making sure we're responding appropriately to it, holding people accountable, not dismissing it as, boys will be boys, that type of thing, and really acknowledging the impact that this type of conduct is having on people on our campuses.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank Lauren Hasselbacher of UW-Madison, Geraldo VilaCruz of Madison College for joining us. Very important topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks.